Coming up today, in an unprecedented move, the U.S. government announces sanctions against North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for human rights abuses. It freezes any assets he might have in the United States. Samsung Electronics posts its best quarterly earnings in 2 years as its Galaxy S7 smartphone line keeps winning new customers around the world. First, the government decides to relax regulations and offer corporate tax breaks in a bid to boost sluggish business investment and create jobs. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Thursday, the 7th of July. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this afternoon, the United States has, for the first time, put North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on its sanctions list for the regime's grave human rights abuses. South Korea has highly welcomed Washington's unexpected move. Gwon-soa starts us off.
It's another strong and independent move by the U.S. to pile pressure on North Korea. This time, Washington is sanctioning the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un himself, over human rights abuses, saying his crimes are among the worst in the world.
The government continues to commit extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, arbitrary arrest and detention, forced labor, and torture.
A lot of the abuses are committed in political prison camps, which hold an estimated 80,000 to 120,000 detainees. The U.S. Treasury Department says the sanctions, the first to target any North Koreans for rights abuses, affect property and other assets within U.S. jurisdiction and extend to 10 other individuals and 5 North Korean state entities. South Korea's foreign ministry has highly evaluated the announcement.
In particular, South Korea takes note that these measures clarify who is responsible for the human rights abuses in North Korea.
The ministry said the move reaffirms Washington's will to continuously enforce its own sanctions on North Korea. It added that South Korea, too, will actively join the international community's various efforts to improve human rights issues in North Korea. It remains to be seen whether the unprecedented U.S. sanctions will have a dramatic effect on North Korea, as they are largely seen as a symbolic measure. Gwon-soa, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea's human rights abuses have also come under intense scrutiny in Europe. A report shows the regime has sent hundreds of workers to EU countries to work like slaves, so the regime's party leadership can siphon off their hard-earned money. Park Jong-hong reports.
They are referred to as state-sponsored slaves, North Korean citizens doing hard labor overseas to earn money for the communist regime. Hundreds of workers are reportedly working in Europe, and 90% of their money is being sent back to North Korea. The London-based European Alliance for Human Rights in North Korea, which published a report with the Leiden Asia Center in the Netherlands, said the foreign currency is used by Pyongyang to try and offset the cash crunch caused by the UN's economic sanctions. Most of the North Koreans are working in shipyards, construction sites, and farms in Poland. They are also employed in leisure and clothing firms in Malta and have worked in other EU countries. The laborers do not have formal contracts, are forced to surrender their passports, and are also kept under surveillance. They're mostly married men with family back in North Korea, a practice which is essentially seen as, quote, hostage-taking. The human rights group says that if they were to defect, their family would face punishment at a political prison camp and, in extreme cases, execution. The report estimates that in 2015 alone, almost $20 million was transferred from Poland to the North Korean regime. A UN report published last year estimated over 50,000 North Koreans were working abroad, earning Pyongyang up to more than $2 billion annually. Park Jong-hong, Arirang News.
Now, in other news, South Korea's tech giant Samsung Electronics posted better than expected earnings in the second quarter of this year. Analysts attribute the uptick to strong sales of its flagship smartphone models released back in March. Kim Min-ji with the details.
It was an earnings surprise for Samsung Electronics. According to the company's earnings guidance, operating profits stood at 8.1 trillion won, or almost $7 billion during the April to June period, up more than 17% from a year ago. Sales rose 3% on year to over $43 billion. It's the first time in more than 2 years that Samsung's quarterly operating profit has topped the 8 trillion won mark. The figure also beats a market consensus of about $6.4 billion. Operating profit in its mobile division is expected at around $3.5 billion, which analysts attribute to better than expected sales of Samsung's flagship Galaxy smartphone models released in March. Sales globally are estimated at 26 million units so far, with 16 million coming in the second quarter alone. Samsung's semiconductor arm, another cash cow for the company, is expected to post roughly $2 billion in profit despite falling prices. The guidance figure does not break down performance by sector, and the company's finalized earnings will be announced later this month. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye is calling for creative efforts to develop new export items and foster new industries. At a meeting aimed at boosting investment and trade, President Park said Korea must create new demand with innovation and appealing products that will revitalize the economy and create jobs to counter the worsening global economic sentiment following Brexit and increased trade protectionism. The president stressed that businesses should explore new markets and induce investment in a preemptive manner to adapt to the fast-changing environment. She also made note of the need to revamp Seoul's traditional export engines like automobiles and semiconductors, as outgoing shipments in those sectors are on a downward trend. Now, staying with economic news, and Korea is doubling down on efforts to create jobs and reinvigorate the economy. After laying out measures to boost the service industry earlier this week, the government is now focusing on bolstering overall investment by fostering new growth engines. Hwang Jie with the details.
Korea is aiming to re-energize investment sentiment among businesses, which have been dropping in the face of slowing global demand. The government laid out measures Thursday that will facilitate investment procedures by stripping away regulations. By giving the green light to 5 investment projects held up by regulations, the government expects 3.6 trillion won, or roughly $3 billion worth of investments to be made across the country. The projects had stalled due to a lack of infrastructure and excessive red tape. On top of paving the way for corporations to speed up plant investments and more, the government has pledged to foster 5 promising industries. They are pet businesses, halal and kosher markets, real estate services, sports, and virtual reality. The support will include pushing through legislation for the pet sector, setting up a virtual reality cluster in Western Seoul, and operating institutions to analyze halal culture. The government also plans to provide tax breaks to corporations investing in startups, while easing conditions for unlisted companies to merge to further boost technological innovation. The ultimate goal is job creation, as the government looks to lift Korea's growth potential and lower the economy's dependence on a small number of export-oriented industries. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Officials from the government, presidential office and parliament will meet today for the first time since the 20th National Assembly opened back in May. They are going to discuss pending bills on economic revitalisation, as well as the government's fiscal stimulus plan announced just last week. That includes a supplementary budget of $8.5 billion. The government's corporate restructuring and countermeasures to the financial impact of Brexit are also going to be on the agenda. Ruling Saenuri Party floor leader Jong Jin-sok said the meeting should help both bolster communication between the three sides and improve the people's livelihoods. South Korea, the United States and Japan are to meet in Hawaii next week to discuss measures against North Korea's continual provocations. The U.S. State Department says it will host the fourth round of the deputy-level trilateral consultations in Honolulu on July 14th. The trilateral meeting will be attended by South Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Im Sung-nam, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Shinsuke Sugiyama. They are going to evaluate North Korea's ongoing missile threats and discuss ways to boost cooperation on sharing information about launches, especially on the North's mid-range Musudan missile. The previous meeting, held in Seoul in April, was focused on denuclearizing North Korea and implementing sanctions on the regime. The US Federal Reserve has decided that interest rates will stay on hold until the consequences of Britain's vote to leave the European Union becomes clearer. Minutes from the Fed's June meeting that were released on Wednesday show that policymakers cited the UK referendum and a severe slowdown in hiring by US employers as the reasons for freezing rates last month. The minutes indicated that many officials thought the sharp hiring slowdown could be a kind of statistical noise, and most argued the economy will be set for rate increases unless it is hit by a financial or economic shock. Now, before the Brexit vote, the Fed had signalled 2 rate hikes would be needed this year to keep the economy from overheating. The next meeting will be held on July 26th and 27th. Now, Britain has released the results of its multi-year inquiry into its decision to go to war in Iraq in 2003. It contains scathing criticism of former Prime Minister Tony Blair, saying that he entered the conflict with flawed intelligence and a complete lack of preparation. Hwang Ho-jun reports.
The results of Britain's 7-year investigation into the Iraq War, published Wednesday, has found the UK's decision to enter the 6-year war in Iraq that left at least 150,000 civilians and about 5,000 soldiers, including 179 British soldiers, dead, was a mistake. It also says there was no evidence to support the theory that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction. The UK went into the conflict before the peaceful options for disarmament had been exhausted, and that the UK's planning for the war was wholly inadequate. The Iraq inquiry, known as the Chilcot Report, also issued a scathing critique of former Prime Minister Tony Blair. It said he had been advised the invasion would likely increase terror threats from extremist organizations such as Al-Qaeda, but he went to war anyway, telling U.S. President George W. Bush, quote, "I will be with you, whatever." In his statement responding to the criticism, Blair apologized for the consequences of his decision, but also defended it.
And again, I accept full responsibility for these points of criticism, even where I do not fully agree with them.
His statement did little to appease families of the fallen.
It's just Tony Blair. There's a lot of others involved, so we can't just pin it on one, but I'm angry at them all.
The White House reacted to the report, with spokesman Josh Earnest saying that President Barack Obama, quote, has been dealing with the consequences of that fateful decision for the entirety of his presidency, and that future presidents will likely have to do the same. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Now, on a much happier note, more than 13 million foreign tourists visited Korea last year, with almost half coming here from China. And according to a new report, Chinese tourists to Seoul are by far and away the biggest spenders. Kim Hae-sung reports.
A new report shows Chinese tourists spend an average of $1,800 on shopping during their trips to Seoul, with 9 out of 10 splashing out on cosmetics. According to a Seoul Institute poll of 1,400 foreign tourists, Chinese visitors spent 6 times more than Japanese tourists and 3 times more than American and European visitors. More than 60% of Chinese visitors said shopping was the main reason they visited the Korean capital, whereas only 9% of Japanese and 26% of Southeast Asian visitors cited shopping as their #1 reason for traveling. The most popular shopping spots for Chinese tourists are duty-free shops, department stores, and traditional markets, and they spend the most on cosmetics, followed by clothes and food. Japanese and Southeast Asian tourists spend the most on food, while American and European visitors use most of their tourist budget on clothes. 김혜성, Arirang News.
Now, for the second consecutive year, Korea's top internet portal Naver is the company young Koreans would most like to work for. Polling over 1,300 college students, local job-seeking site Incrute found 10% of the respondents chose Naver for its development potential and the company's vision. Next on the list were CJ Jedang, Amore Pacific and Samsung Electronics. Korea's biggest tech giant was up 2 notches from last year. There were also 3 public enterprises among this year's top 10. The poll showed that young people in Korea are putting greater priority on job security these days due to the tough job market. Well, those are stories we have for you at this hour. For more of the latest, don't forget to check out the website arirang.com/news. Have a great day or night, wherever you're watching us. Goodbye.